6.5%, was it? Is that what the current odds are of the Stanley Cup?
Well, and if you look at the round-by-round progression, the Stanley Cup favorite is the Vancouver Canucks.
Like, what a time to be alive!
Talking you through every goalie controversy, scoring slump, and draft lottery bust, this is the C4 Podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com. Here they are, the best starting lineup we could afford under the salary cap. Chris, Matt, Anna, and Adam.
Welcome to another episode of the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast, brought to you by CanucksHockeyBlog.com on the Full Press Coverage Network. I'm Chris at Lightforce, joined virtually as always by the infinitely wonderful Anna Forsyth at A4Size03, who, if you go to CanucksHockeyBlog.com, is officially a co-host now. Technical problems have prevented me from updating CHB for so long, and after a conversation we had, I finally figured it out.
Well, that's why you're the brains behind the operation in terms of tech stuff, for sure. I appreciate that. It's fine. Our website was just a little behind the times, but...
I mean, there's still stuff that's kind of funky about the site, and that's partially, I don't have full control over it, but I was able to, encourage the hamster to spin the wheel a little bit.
Yeah.
To make things go. I mean, just taking that website day by day.
Day by day, yeah. We'll get to our intro and segments eventually, day by day.
Yeah, day by day. I mean, the way this episode might go, it could take a couple days because we had another phenomenal guest lined up. So last week, you got to hear Tom Manek talk a little bit about the business of sport and obviously the radio situation, broadcast situation here in Vancouver. It was the longest episode of C4 ever, and we're going to go and follow that up with another lengthy episode because we have Brock McGillis joining us this week to talk about sort of his journey within the professional hockey sphere and really talk about inclusivity and the hockey culture that we see today and what can be done to help change it. And I feel that we really only scratched the surface in the time because he's just such a well-spoken, person. It's just, we've already lined up. I mean, you're going to hear, we're going to have Brock on in a future episode and potentially on a patron show, OTR.
So yeah, that should encourage you to sign up. Like once you've had the episode today, you'll realize that you cannot get enough of Brock. And we definitely...
sure couldn't.
Underestimated both our guests and the amount of time that we'd kind of set aside for them. And geez, we should have really learned that we invite these smart people on. They're going to want to talk and we're going to want to listen. So.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I think to the conversation we had with Tom last week and the conversation we had with Brock this week, it's like, let's just keep this going. And I'm looking at the clock and I'm trying to be cognizant of the time. And I'm thinking, well, we got a show to record, but the show's sort of taking back seat to the conversation with Brock. Yeah, you're right. We probably need to learn our lesson when we get very smart, intelligent people on. It becomes so informative and so enthralling that it's hard to sort of thank them for their time, because that's the other thing. I don't want it to stop.
Yeah.
But we will talk about the Vancouver Canucks as well. Today was the NHL, trade line. I'm going to say today because we're recording, normal Monday. So when you're listening to us now, it's happened. Surprise. And the Canucks actually were a team that was involved in a majority of this. I'm not going to say majority, like the way teams make trades in the deadline. The Canucks were in tied for the second spot, I want to say, with deals, which I don't think anyone would have even thought was going to happen considering they're still in COVID protocol.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about the fact that the Vancouver Canucks are tentatively returning back to the ice the end of this week and what that schedule looks like. Obviously, the NHL trade deadline happens, so there's other things to get into. So you know what? Let's waste no further of your time. Let's dive into Rewind. What should we talk about first? COVID or trades?
I guess COVID is the kind of the stuff that happened in between last week's record and this week. We at the time we were talking to Tom, I think he was of the opinion, and we were both of the opinion, that there was no way, Canucks could get all these games done, and that the NHL weren't going to move the playoffs, especially with the Summer Olympics coming up. But apparently the NHL will move the playoffs and Canucks will get all their games done.
Mm-hmm. Well, since our last episode, there have been more players added to the list. Someone actually had commented on I think it was a Dreger tweet by saying, wouldn't it just be easier to say which players are not at this point? Because you could fit that into a tweet.
Was it 4 on the active roster who ended up not being added?
I think so. And then was it, I believe, I still haven't heard, but Beagle was the last one who got added.
Yeah, so maybe that's even 3. Because obviously Pedersen is on IR, so he does not count towards the active roster, but he was also not on the list. But
the challenge, though, was that the NHL and the Canucks had sort of made this announcement, here's our plan, and then suddenly another player gets added to COVID protocol, which delayed the reopening of the Canucks facilities, which there are actually provincial restrictions that could potentially impact the Vancouver Canucks return to the ice, because WorkSafe BC can now shut down a workplace for an extended period of time if there's an exposure event. So as it stands right now, again, Monday evening as we're recording, the Canucks are tentatively scheduled to return on Friday. And then I want to say they have to play, was it 19 games in 31 days? I think that was the number.
Yeah, I thought it was 35, but either way, it's insane schedule. And if nothing else, you've got to say that it's going to lead to more injuries.
Well, and this is the thing that I understand there is a business side to this, obviously resolution in so much of broadcast and obviously sponsorship and everything to that effect. There's also the integrity of the NHL season, ensuring that teams play in a balanced schedule or balanced-ish schedule within their divisions. It's just, if you're the Vancouver Canucks, you have a good number of players on your roster who have been unfit. Like Tanner Pearson today was talking about it, and he had said how, there are players with a variety of different symptoms, but many of them are still feeling the after effects. So a player such as Adam Gaudette, who is a former player, and we'll get into that in a moment, who was pulled off the protocol list, could potentially be someone who is suffering from these after effects. And considering the long haul symptoms we've heard, where people find that their sort of air capacity, like lung capacity, is significantly dropped, and their just overall fitness has gone down. I'm genuinely concerned for some of these players who could potentially put in the position to return to the ice, where they might say they're fit, and all indications suggest they can play, but then it's the question, should they?
Totally, and we've talked about this before in regards to injuries, that players are often not the best judge, and they shouldn't have to make the decisions. That should be an organizational decision. We've talked before about Canucks and maybe their place within the league and how much power they have, but I completely get it from a league integrity point of view. It's going to be really difficult if Canucks can't make those games up. But at the same time, from a player safety point of view, I think it could be really dangerous from a fitness point of view, from injuries. Not to mention they've just gone through this kind of horrific experience from a mental health point of view.
Well, and Tanner even talks about that, how it was, at first, it was sort of a risk that players understood they were dealing with. But when it started being passed on to their families, their wives, girlfriends, he said, pregnant wives, which I actually don't know off the top of my head who that might be.
I think Brandon Sutter's wife is definitely pregnant.
Okay. But what I mean? There's definitive concern. I can't imagine how I would feel. I'm not a professional athlete, but we talked a little bit about it in the last episode. I'm currently in isolation because of Baby Force's childcare exposure. We're fine, all things considered, knock on wood, no symptoms. But let's say I brought this home and my
Mhm.
wife or my child got sick. That would almost destroy me.
Yeah.
And that I can't imagine how they're dealing with it. Or I was reading this article where Bo Horvat's dad was talking about he whose provinces away is beside himself, and how Bo had to isolate from Gunnar, and how, like, how does this how does he handle, how does Bo handle, like, again, there's such a human issue here, and it's hard to understand how some people are like, oh, I'm so glad they're coming back. They need to come back. It's good for us. Or, it's not as bad, or all these different reasons. I resigned myself maybe last week. I could care less if they came back. I want them to be better. I want them to be healthy. Let's focus on next year. Like that. And this almost goes to an episode that we talked about where Michaela Gaudette was on the broadcast, and she talked about sort of the human issue as to playing in the bubble and then sort of the return to pandemic hockey, how it really enlightened me and opened my eyes to their experience. And I'm like, that's what's most important, not what's in it for me as a fan.
Yeah, totally. And I do think part of this is like the players' point of view as well. Maybe had been a bit, narrow-minded. They thought, we want to play, this is our job, this is our livelihood, this is what we want to do. And then I think it's definitely been eye-opening from all corners. But we're still in the position where NHL wants Canucks to play out their full season, and it just looks more than a little ridiculous from our point of view.
And frankly, with the schedule as it is, I can't see how the NHL, at least in the North Division, deals with another prolonged stoppage. Like, if the Vancouver Canucks cannot get back on the ice, or this impacts another team where there are games, like, they've run out of space. And it's not definitely a decision the NHL, I don't think, wants to have to deal with, but
totally,
it is what it is.
It's definitely at capacity. The playoffs have already been pushed back. This is really as far as they can go in terms of wiggle room.
Yeah. What else has happened since last week? Tanner Pearson, he signed himself a new contract.
Yeah.
I like your response to that.
I mean, even that seems so long ago. Yeah, that's the thing that happened. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's just kind of another sort of false move by Benning, just squandering a potential, because it's kind of, Tanner Pearson was, a trade they got and done well with, turned out like a player with pretty low stock into a fairly high producing, good complementary second line piece. That's something that you can move. And instead, it's like adding someone on Twitter described it to me as band-aids, constant band-aids. Yeah. And it just gives us more problems down the line, even though Jim Benning does not foresee them.
Yeah. So Tanner Pearson, for some reason, if you haven't already heard, he's back for 4 more years, 3.75 AAV. The shocking part, I think, about this deal is, one, the 4 years, though I think if it was 4, people could have accepted if it wasn't at the 3.75. Like, that's the part that really most I've seen have struggled with, because you think about what Tanner provides you, and then you look at comparable players within the league and what they are currently making, and it's considerably less in many cases. So how does Jim come up with this number, 3.75, as being a good number? But then in turn, how does he not foresee any cap issues? Like, he was talking about this in a presser, and then as well on 650, where I just want to point out, House Radio started holding his feet to the fire. That's never a good sign when House Radio turns on you.
Yeah, House Radio has turned. They heal now.
it was even suggested, okay, maybe you know something about the cap that we don't, like some money that's going to be found. But how does this even make sense in that world? And Jim's answer is, oh, people just don't know the numbers. We know the numbers. Okay, yeah, I go to Cap Friendly and I get my numbers there like, most of our listeners do. I'd argue that Cap Friendly is probably pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, it's basic maths, like you can't put the square peg in the round hole, Jim. You may not foresee a cap problem, but you're going to hit that wall.
Well, his defense is all teams have to suffer from this flat cap. Yes, but all teams are not the Vancouver Canucks already pushing the cap.
Yeah, and actually, friend of the show, Sam Chan, who's now got like so much airtime this episode, but at least this is positive. She said, she brought up the point, like, we're not going to have cap problems because Canucks will roster a cap compliant team to open the next season. It'll just be the price we have to pay to do that.
Mm-hmm. It's surreal. And, I want to point out, Tanner getting paid, good for Tanner. I like the guy. I actually have no problem with him coming back in a Canucks jersey. I just question if the money that he's making is the money the Canucks can afford to pay him. And this goes to the point that I've raised many, many episodes. Just because a player makes this much money on the market does not mean the Vancouver Canucks need to pay for that player. I get that player may not be a Vancouver Canuck, but it's just like you and I when we're running our household budget. We should be spending it smartly on things that help us move forward, which one might argue this does, because when you go day by day, you
does it make Canucks a better team to have Tanner Pearson on the roster on Friday? Yeah. They're not? Yes. But Canucks going to win the cup
with Tanner Pearson
anytime? Yeah,
well, someone I saw a tweet today.
Of his contract? No.
Where someone had suggested the Vancouver Canucks are acquiring so many pieces of the Washington Capitals Stanley Cup win that eventually they'll just be awarded the cup by default, because that's how it works. It's like, the Thanos ring.
Right. I think it's more they just send the, replica, a knockoff replica where Stanley Cup is spelled with like a K.
Yeah. We were... Jay, Nexus, my brother and I, we were chatting about this, and it's just like, yeah, if you acquire this many pieces, eventually it just all comes into place. And I guess that's how the league works. It's the new way of the NHL. But good on Tanner. He's back for 4 years, and whatever this means to the Vancouver Canucks moving forward, and we'll find out. Again, is it possible there's found money? Maybe. I mean, there's been some scuttlebutt that because of the pandemic and the fact that the Canucks got punished for the Luongo contract, that maybe the Louis $3 million comes off the books next season. And if, let's say, that was forgiven by the league, that helps.
Sure, but that's just less than Tanner's contract even.
No, but that's plus there's the Spooner money off the books.
Yes,
so there's
true. And there's Louis money, and it is coming, but it's... Yeah, I just see Jim creating more problems whenever they're being solved.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you go day by day. You do something that if you were looking beyond tomorrow, you can see as a problem. Like if I go and I feed Baby Force as much sugar and chocolate as I possibly can today, because I'm just operating day by day, I realize how that's going to impact me tomorrow, because I'm not actually looking at just today. I know that tomorrow it's going to suck when she doesn't sleep tonight. Like I'm thinking big picture here. I'm thinking 2 days out.
Yep.
Anywho, NHL trade deadline. The Canucks were in on the action, which is surprising enough because most thought that wouldn't be the case. So let's talk about the big move, and that's Adam Gaudette is no longer a Vancouver Canuck. I think we, as Canucks fans, should not be too surprised that Adam Gaudette was a possible trade chip, just because think about who's on the team, who would be desirable in a market, and ultimately who you might be able to move. So that part doesn't surprise me. But what are your thoughts on the return? You get Matthew Highmore, who arguably, I don't know. I'm not going to say he's not a good player. I mean, there's thought that there's maybe potential with Highmore that doesn't exist with Gaudette. But by all accounts, this is maybe a lateral move. So then you could say the Canucks win because they got $225,000 in cap space that they promptly spend. But we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, I mean, seems like a case of sell low, buy high more. Apparently with Gaudette, like, I just, from the way they handled Gaudette from his re-signing, they only re-signed him to 1 year when they probably could have got him to 2, at that fairly low price. You're selling at when he's at his absolute lowest ebb, really. And when really he has a high potential to have a greater upside. Maybe when he's recovered from COVID and his, gastro issue that he finally had sorted over the off season and sort of just rebuilding strength from. And maybe when Canucks get a better run of games, he adjusts to his position on the wing a bit more. Like, either he's going to become a good, functional lower six piece, or he might be like an asset that you can flip later on.
Yeah.
But like every step of the way, they made a misstep. Like Highmore, by all accounts, slightly better on the defensive end than Gaudette. Obviously slightly cheaper. But yeah, he's like, he's a fourth line / press box guy. And not that Adam Gaudette's not spent any time in the press box, but yeah, he definitely doesn't have the potential that Gaudette has. So,
yeah. Well, and that's sort of where the thought is that maybe the Vancouver Canucks have decided Adam wasn't the answer and they've moved on. You know what? I don't have an issue with that in so much that, okay, you're gonna move on. You got something instead of potentially losing him for nothing, whatever the reasons might be. It's just that when you look at other deals that took place today and in the lead up to the deadline, you kind of wonder, could there not have been maybe a little bit more? But then I also acknowledge the Vancouver Canucks, one, weren't negotiating from a place of any strength. Obviously, the current situation has put them into a position that I don't think any team would want to be in. And then you have a general manager who, maybe I am jaded, was going to get fleeced no matter what.
Yeah, it's just, you go from Jim saying a few days ago that, Canucks wouldn't be in on many trades because of the human side of things, them being in the middle of COVID outbreak. And then boom, trading patient zero amid rumors of, locker room disquiet, which as we don't know if there's any truth to that. There's definitely been some rumors about it, but yeah, I think it just shows how day to day he is. Like, he probably doesn't even remember that he said that, because it's not just his plans are bad, he's also just terrible at presenting them.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this a few shows back. They really shouldn't have Jim doing media.
Nope.
They'd be better off getting, I think it's Chris Brumwell who does media now for the Canucks. They'd be better getting Chris just doing it. Like, it's tough. And unfortunately, not only do you have, Jim doing media, but the fact that Jim, as honest as he might be, is honestly not that good. And you're going to hear about that from our guest a little bit later on too. It's not just us that holds this opinion. A few other deals took place. So Jordy Ben is no longer a Vancouver Canuck. He is on his way to Winnipeg to properly say it. And my goodness, Jim, he got himself a draft pick for that deal, a 6th round. Harman, boy genius, Harman Dial, he actually tweeted how he sees no other franchise get so excited about a 6th round pick like Vancouver Canucks fans do. And honestly, that's like, oh my God, yeah, Jim, that's it. Do more of that. 6th round. Who cares? Like, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's a pick. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
The thing is, I mean, it goes threefold of he actually flipped an asset instead of holding on until it had just zero value.
Yeah, he's learning. He's evolving. Maybe Caleb was onto something. In 7 years, Jim will have a Stanley Cup winner because that's just how long it takes them to evolve.
Right. And then there's the fact that, amateur scouting seems to be Jim Benning's front office one strength, although obviously we've lost a key part of that. But, they didn't do badly this draft either without their main guy in Judd Brackett. But, yeah, obviously would have preferred something higher, but I'm much happier with, it happening and getting something.
That's right. And then, unfortunately, though, for Vancouver Canucks fans who like Jim having lots of draft picks, Jim proceeded to send a 4th-round pick to Chicago for but Madison Bowie, who is now a Vancouver Canuck, and a 5th-round pick. The Bowie acquisition, I think, has more to do with the expansion draft, and we've talked about this, where the Vancouver Canucks need to expose a certain number of players who have played X number of games within the NHL in this current season. And in the blue line, they did not have that, like based on players under contract. I would suggest you just expose Tyler Myers because Seattle ain't going to take him. And if they do, thanks, Seattle, for taking this contract off our books and providing us flexibility.
Yeah, but, I mean, I did call him a broken fridge and left in an alleyway on Twitter. And he's about... he's about as unwieldy as one of those appliances. But, as someone else said, like, his contract is supposed to be his expansion protection.
Yeah.
Like, Seattle are not going to take him.
Well, no, they might. It just costs the Canucks a whole lot of cash to make it up. It's amazing the number of people who still hold on to the belief that the Seattle Kraken are going to take either Louis Eriksson or potentially Tyler Meyer. Like, oh yeah, totally. Seattle's totally going to go and take what has never worked in Vancouver and still ain't working today. Like, anyhow. But yeah, the Vancouver Canucks were involved in a trade line that I don't think, at least us, you and I, C4 Discord, probably the Canucks community generally thought was going to happen because, hey, life had dealt the Vancouver Canucks a tough hand. And I don't think anyone would have been too upset if that was the case. But Jim found a way as he went day by day. Speaking of Jim, I mean, in this evolution, he must be practicing. And really, like the greatest general managers in the league, they never actually stop practicing their skills to improve their game. Might be through role play, what have you. But you shouldn't be any different either. ICBA trains thousands of workers every year on everything from Excel spreadsheets to excavating trenches, from personal leadership skills to construction estimating, from fall protection to effective management skills, and 500 other courses. Online, on demand, webinars, and even COVID-safe in person. ICBA has an option for you and your busy lifestyle. Start climbing the corporate depth chart by sharpening your skills today. Check out icba.ca/courses.
Take hitting out of the game. You can't hit anymore, so don't do it.
The unsportsmanlike conduct, I want to get an explanation on that.
No kidding.
Because how do you get suspended for unsportsmanlike conduct?
Plus interference. There's no interference there. He had the puck.
Now, Madison never ever did that before. Now, why did he do it? Because he was mad.
Well, your early favorite for the Calder Trophy, that's for sure. Elias Pettersson, you might even say your early favorite for the Hart Trophy.
Just to get back to your question, Elias is going to play plenty. He didn't play. He's going to get a lot of power play time. And, yeah, I'm concerned about our offense. We lost 200-point players, and we've got to find a way to score.
So we're pleased to introduce our very special guest, Brock McGillis, who some might know online as a former professional hockey player and now a big supporter of inclusivity, not only within the NHL hockey, but sports in general. Welcome, Brock. Thanks for joining the longest running and best mediocre Canucks podcast there is.
Yeah, so if yours is the best, does that mean both of Sam Chang's are the worst of the mediocre?
Not at all, but yeah, hey, we follow a mediocre team, so yeah, completely fair to put us all in that category.
I'm just joking. I love Sam, and I think she does great stuff. And I'm excited to be here with you. I think Canucks fandom is one of the most unique, rarest treasures on Twitter, and it's a special group.
It's a nice way of describing Canucks Twitter. In fact, it's probably one of the nicest descriptions of Canucks Twitter that we ourselves have used. And we're members of Canucks Twitter, so
the infighting is unbelievable.
Hey, there are actually very few things that unite Canucks Twitter, but when it does become a united force, there's nothing stopping it. Unfortunately, it's as rare as a Vancouver Canucks Stanley Cup win.
Yeah, or as rare as a Stanley Cup Finals appearance.
Or these days, as rare as a Canucks game. So.
What was it? 94? 94.
Which, well, yeah, 94. There was the 2011, the 1982.
Oh, that's right. We made it once in since the new millennium. So that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but we thought we'd get you on to talk more about everything else. Oh gosh, don't get us started on Mark.
That will definitely be something that unites Canucks Twitter.
I'm sure Canucks Twitter has an opinion there. But Brock, for those listeners of our show that might not know you, or at least are aware of your history, could you sort of give us an idea of sort of your career in hockey, how it started, sort of how it came to an end?
Yeah, I was born in Sudbury, Ontario, so Northern Ontario, and I grew up like your stereotypical hockey kid. I was in a small town just outside of Sudbury, actually, and lived down the street from an arena. My dad was good friends with the arena manager, and I'd pack my bag and go to the rink every night. And if a team showed up missing a goalie, I jumped on the ice. And on the weekends, my parents would drop all 3 meals off at the rink. I just lived there, and any team, it didn't matter the caliber, if they were younger, older, house league to AAA, I wanted to skate. And I got pretty good, I guess. And before I knew it, I was playing, very competitive hockey at AAA, and then moved on to the OHL. I played in Windsor and Sault Ste. Marie, and along the way there, I struggled a great deal. I struggled because I was suppressing my sexuality, and I didn't want anyone to know and wouldn't accept myself being gay. So I adhered to the sort of hypermasculine attitudes of hockey, became a womanizer, drank a lot, partied hard, and my career started to derail with injuries. I went from, being on NHL draft lists and supposed to be, a high pick and have this linear trajectory to the NHL to all of a sudden I was playing in the minors in the US and then over in Europe, and ultimately took a step back and played a university hockey at Concordia. And after that decided I was going to play pro one year, and I was getting my visa at the border in Windsor. And I was filling out paperwork, and I stopped midway through. And I said, this is it, I'm done. I turned the car around, and that was the end. So, quick, we're done. See you later.
Wow, pretty dramatic kind of end to that.
That's been my life since.
You kind of touched on that briefly in that story there, but what can you give some examples of how you observed like that homophobia and kind of in general the hypermasculine hockey culture that kept you closeted?
Yeah, I every day in the locker room, I heard players even teasing each other using homo-negative language and putting each other down. And typically the majority of the ways that I heard were through sexist language and homophobic language, to make it seem like if you're a man, you're up here at the top, and if you're a gay man or a woman, you're less than. So it was ingrained in my mind from a very young age, hearing this in locker rooms, probably since I was, 9 or 10 years old, that it was bad and wrong, and I shouldn't be that, and I can't be that, and I especially can't be that if I want to be a professional hockey player. And growing up in the sport, you become known for the sport. So anytime people saw me, whether it's friends at school or parents of friends or relatives, it was house hockey, and you become known for this. And then you get to a certain level, whether it's junior or major junior, and all of a sudden I'm walking through a mall in Windsor, Ontario, and I'm signing autographs for kids, and people are treating you. You're walking into bars as an underage person, and you're getting VIP bottle service from owners of clubs, and you're treated like, I equate junior hockey players to like Instagram influencers or YouTubers, where they're sort of famous, but they're not, like Brad Pitt fame, which is like Sidney Crosby, where they're not accessible to, the public and to society, where, they're still your neighbor, but they're famous. So it's kind of like that. And hearing that language on a daily basis made me suppress who I was. It made me drink to numb. I drank every day from 17 or 18 until I was 23. I had a season-ending injury every year from 15 until I stopped playing the sport, and still feel the effects of that today. And it played with me. I would, people thought I had this great life because they'd see me, signing autographs and getting, all my friends into clubs. And then, but what they didn't know is I'd go home at night and I'd cry. I hated myself. I wanted to die. And on more than one occasion, I tried to take my own life.
Oh, wow.
And it was from the language I heard. It was from the behaviors and attitudes that made me feel like I wasn't right.
And did that come from both teammates and like adults as well? Was there that element? Was it reinforced from all levels?
Yeah, depending on the place. I mean, I had some people, coaches who weren't, but it's definitely a characteristic of, you see most coaches in hockey come from the culture, and then it's ingrained in them. They're a product of an environment, and then they perpetuate that culture onto the next, and those behaviors and beliefs onto the next generation of players. And typically growing up, you probably spend more time with your coaches and with your teammates in locker rooms than you do with your parents or with your, peers at school or anywhere else. Like you're in that every night. Mm-hmm. And then when you're not there, they become your friends. And then when you move on to higher levels, it's even worse because once you hit junior, it's 7 days a week and everyone's coming from all over. So your only friends are your 23 teammates, really. And then whoever the group becomes friends with. So you're like in this little insular bubble and it's like an echo chamber of hypermasculinity and this belief that you have to act a certain way, talk a certain way, dress a certain way to take part. And it's really messed up. Like now, even when I go into locker rooms today, one of the things I do is tell me something you enjoy that you typically wouldn't tell a teammate, because there's such a level of conformity that all you're allowed to talk about in a locker room are women in hockey. Men's hockey is women, partying, and sports. Maybe gaming today might have, influenced the culture a little bit, but that's those are almost it. Music a little bit. And even that, it's a fight, there's very few things that are allowed. And we can even see in the NHL. I mean, look at Dougie Hamilton's been traded twice because he doesn't fit into a locker room setting, because he'd rather go to museums and read than go out drinking with the boys. We penalize people who want to be, educated.
Yeah. I will let Chris jump in a sec. I just want to kind of finish that thought on the hockey culture. And I'm wondering if what was your experience in Europe? Was it any different from in North America in that respect?
No, I think even over there, people started to, I think the culture is the culture. I grew up when, we see more of it today, but when Gong Show had started, right? That was kind of when I was in junior and whatnot. So I think it perpetuated things internationally, and that now we've seen to trickle into the Barstool and different groups, right? And so I think they had already started to adhere to the hockey culture in a sense, because it was, that's what you had to do to be a hockey player. So, and it was reinforced every year when you had, 10 North Americans come over to play. Also, let's not pretend that, I try not to pretend that other cultures aren't as bad or almost as bad. And you look at soccer culture in Europe. I was in the Netherlands where, soccer is huge. And it's not very much better, if any better, than hockey culture. So, there's a lot of problematic cultures there that are influencing a subsect of people.
Yeah.
Something that really struck me was a Twitter thread that Anna had actually retweeted, and I believe it was one of your Brock Talks is what you would title it. Great name, by the way.
Thank you.
And you told this story of these young hockey players, I think it was in Sudbury, and sort of a conversation that happened and how almost nonchalantly one of the players used a very derogatory homophobic slur to describe an answer. And in that moment, it just occurred to me that could have been me, and it probably would have been me, especially at that age. I didn't grow up in the professional sporting culture. I mean, I played amateur sports right through to my young adulthood until apparently severe life-altering injuries get in the way of work. But the thing that really struck me was that I don't think I would have ever used the term to actually do anything more than try to say something in jest, not realizing how the words mattered, or really how if I didn't speak up or I didn't say anything back then, I was simply enabling that culture to continue. And it, 20 years later, really, really rocked me. So I'm genuinely curious, like, when you sort of returned back to working within the world of hockey, whether it be back in Sudbury, like, and you were out not only to these athletes, but the community. And what was that sort of expectation that you had? Like, did you have any, like, how people would respond? Because again, it's so ingrained, and to the point of your Twitter thread, still something that happens as recently as the last few years.
Yeah, well, at that point, I wasn't even out.
Oh, wow.
I was out to my family and friends in my private life, and it happened because I was friends with Brendan Burke, Brian Burke's son. And Brendan sent me a text one day, and it said, "I can't wait for the day that you're out to your family like I am to mine." And I didn't know what to say. Predominantly out of, like, I knew from a young age my family would be incredibly inclusive and supportive. But I feared because my parents were my dad was so involved in hockey, coached junior and AAA hockey. He was a scout in the OHL. My brother was a first-round pick in the OHL and played professionally. And I feared that they'd become more sensitive and in tune to the language used in those settings and stand up to it and accidentally out me. Mm-hmm. So, but Brendan sent me a text, said that, "I can't wait for the day that you're out to your family like I am to mine." And I didn't answer him. And 2 days later, he passed. Oh, those ended up being the last words he ever said to me. So I knew at that point I had to tell them. And I told my family and friends, all my friends out of hockey. I remained closeted in hockey. And this was before I stopped playing. And even after I retired, I moved back to Sudbury. I was running 3 hockey businesses, an off-ice training business, on-ice skill development, and goalie training business. And I was finishing university. So I was working with close to 100 hockey players daily, varying skill sets, predominantly high end, like AAA, junior, major junior, professional. And it was about 4 years into the business, and I ran it for about 6 years. I stopped in 2019. But about 4 years in, this mother called me and she said, "Brock, I want to set you up on a date." I went, "Oh, shit. Like, what am I going to say, right? I don't want to tell her. I don't want anyone in hockey to know, especially up there. There's no exposure to much diversity, let alone LGBTQ plus people." And I said, "What's her name?" And she said, "Steve." And I panicked, and I feared knowing that, my athletes are going to know and like, they're going to leave. They're not going to want to work with me. Their parents aren't going to want them to work with me. And that was the reason why I didn't tell any of them. And I thought in that moment when I realized they all knew after the mother told me that, hey, maybe I should tell them. And I thought, or I can do a little sociology experiment, because what I realized is they know I'm gay, but they don't know that I know that they know that I'm gay. So I could observe them, kind of like hockey players in their natural habitat or animals in the wild, so to speak. And that's what I decided to do. And I'd always tried to curb racist, sexist, homophobic language with my athletes. And I was doing a pretty good job of it, but I started to recognize, and I probably, avoided before, so subconsciously just didn't notice this, but anytime they'd say something homophobic, they'd freeze up and apologize to me. And sort of nod my head and shrug and just keep going with things. And then I thought after a while, cool, well, maybe I'm creating a shift. I'm influencing these kids. They know I'm gay and they apologize, and they're becoming aware of their behaviors and their language, even though it's been embedded and programmed in them for so many years in this hockey culture. And I thought, or maybe, they apologize to me, then they go to school into the rink and call kids fags. And I had no idea really until one day I wasn't there, and I had a sprint coach working with some athletes, and at the end of a workout, he told them they had 10 more sprints, and one of the younger players, who comes from a very progressive household, looked at the sprint coach and said, "This is so gay, I can't believe you're making us do this." And the older player, who didn't necessarily come from as progressive of a background, looked at him and said, who was already in the OHL, more ingrained in the culture, looked at him and said, "We don't say that here, give me 50 push-ups." And the kid said, "You're right." And then hearing that story, that's when I recognized, and then not only that, but then my athletes deciding amongst themselves that was something they would do if they said something, that if they slipped up, that's what they would do. And I went, oh, I can create shifts. I have the ability to create shifts in this culture. And they were creating shifts because these kids are influencers in their communities. If they're really good players on their teams, different things, and they were taking it to their peers at school, to their teammates. And kids were starting to do this, like people I'd never even met and haven't met, were like, young men, young women were doing push-ups for using homophobic language. And I went, shit, like this is possible. And it was the first time that it made me believe that it was possible. I mean, I had some things after that made me question whether it was. I had a hockey association in Sudbury blackball me when they found out I was gay. I would volunteer, so I had a business doing off-ice training with teams during the season, and I typically work with 10 to 12 teams in season, doing off-ice training, and teams would hire me. But I'd also volunteer my time with, approximately 8 teams a year, where I'd go to practices free of charge, know anything, help as many teams as I could. And all of a sudden the association said that I couldn't train their teams. And I was the only one in the city who did this work who wasn't allowed to train. And I was the only one that was volunteering my time for free. Plus I worked with the most elite players in the off season. So it really made no sense. Mm-hmm. And true to form, my father saw the president and says, "It because Brock's gay." He denied knowing. And then the next day, actually I went to a rink, and a coach looked at me that I had been helping and thought I was friends with, and he said, "I don't need your help anymore. See you later." And it was just like that. And they had banned me, and then coaches started kicking me off staffs. And I saw hockey culture. I saw what I had been afraid of for so long. And then I started thinking, if it's happening to me as an adult, how do kids feel? So in one, almost at the same time, I'm seeing both sides of it, where I'm seeing, progressive behaviors and people willing to create shifts because it's been humanized for them, and they care, and they, most of those kids, I called me if they were on their teams and they were homesick. They called me instead of their parents at 3 a.m. crying and everything else. And, they saw me as family. And then I had these coaches and these people who, these adults who were, trying to oppress me at the same time. And it was like this crazy duality, and it was mind-boggling to go through. It was definitely, messed with me a lot.
Yeah. I wonder if you kind of saw that kind of old hockey man mentality from the one side, and maybe more progressive ideas from the young people that you were coaching. Did that give you any hope at all that things were changing, or do you still think it needs to be like given this human side to knowing a gay person that it affects?
I think we need this. We need to humanize the issue fully, because some of my athletes would come to me later on and tell me how their teammates would like say to them, or their friends at school, and be like, "Why do you train with the gay guy?" And I was sitting there, like the only person doing this. I played professional hockey. I was, worked with the most elite players, had the most kids drafted in the OHL in the time I did this from Sudbury, and probably more than we'd had in over 10 years in a single draft all of a sudden. And we were doing really good work, and I brought in elite people to work with them. And like people would still, kids, adults, the same. And until we humanize the issue and really have people see it as something we need to rally around and shift the culture for, the way we have with so many other things in the culture. I mean, any player will stand up and say, I skate for cancer, and I do this for my grandmother or my mom or my uncle or this, that, or the other. Or, we've seen how the hockey community rallied around Humble and different things. And I think hockey people are good people. For the most part, I really believe that. I think people are good people. I just think that they don't recognize that these are issues that we may need to rally around and shift so that it's a space for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm curious, sort of, and this is, again, some of it's my experience growing up. There are many adults who I would have known as adults. I'm an adult now, but they're the same people that were in these positions of power, these positions of influence, that held these very, I don't know how to describe them, anything, conservative views, which I feel does a disservice. And now they're suggesting, no, actually, we're much more progressive than that. I won't claim to suggest that someone can't have an experience like me who can see how what they did in hindsight was wrong, how it would have mattered in their inaction contributed to the problem. But is it possible to say that we need some of these kids that, you've encountered and many others have, to have a generational shift when they're in that position of power and in those positions of influence? Or is this something that can happen with sort of the culture as it today and evolving, quick enough or fast enough for those that are in the game today?
Well, I think that's, there's a few different things there. I think hockey is traditionally conservative, to your point. I think a lot of hockey people are, and you can see it in people's likes and mentions and retweets and everything else. I will say, though, that regardless of which political party you subscribe to, it doesn't mean that you have to be oppressive. And, I think regardless of people can disagree on policy and taxes and different things, but once people become oppressive, then there's an issue, in my opinion. And that's where I kind of draw the line. I can, argue policy with somebody and disagree with them and still be their friend. If you want to oppress people based off their race, gender, sexuality, or anything else, I just can't do it. I have no respect for it. And sadly, a lot of the times these are people I have to work with to change it. And it's complicated because we can say, well, once the old guard's out, but there's been old guard after old guard after old guard, and they keep getting replaced by the new old guard. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a number of things we need to do. And first of all, we need to encourage players and humanize issues at every level of the sport. Because here's what happens. There's NHL players who talk and act a certain way. And then junior kids go into, training camps and everything else. And then they're repeating what they see and hear because that's who they want to be. They're going to emulate them. And then they go back and then they train. And then the younger kids in junior are emulating them. And that, trickle down effects going to continue to happen. Will we see tiny incremental shifts? Absolutely. I think we already have. But if we're going to have, massive shifts, we need to humanize issues for the whole culture and really, really hold them accountable to shift. And I think it's going to come from, humanizing issues for players and getting them to engage and recognize. And then from there, it's holding leagues and federations and governing bodies accountable and saying this isn't okay. Like, the reality is, like, it's not a safe space for queer people in a hockey locker room across Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that being funded by government dollars and taxpayer dollars and everything else? Like, that's not okay. You know what I mean? So there's an aspect there. I think humanizing the issue, I think, will get people to rally in terms of players. And then we have that goal with the next generation of, having that full shift. Otherwise, we're just going to have a new generation of the same. We got to get them to speak up. We got to get more Curtis Gabriels out there that are willing to use their voice and their likeness and their, influence on the culture to speak up against these things, but they're not even being educated on it. And they've been in this bubble their entire lives where the majority of them are straight, or everyone's assumed to be straight, predominantly white, middle to upper class, and they've been able to say and do whatever they want in a locker room their entire lives. So, and they haven't been outside that locker room. They haven't engaged with people really outside those rooms. They spend 6-7 days a week in there from the age of 8 years old, if not younger. So there's a big issue where they have no idea of, oppression and social justice and what goes on in society. So they're just being influenced by what they see on TV. And if they are, more conservative and they see one side of it and don't hear the actual impact, then yeah, of course they're going to be influenced a certain way. Like, how could they not be? You know what I mean? They're in a bubble. Mm-hmm. But I think we can guide them, but we need the powers to be. Like, I've offered to go across the NHL. They said, what do you want to do with the league? And I said, I'll go across all your teams and speak to the players and humanize. And I have academics who can do the education module to follow that up. We saw with the murder of George Floyd that over 200 NHL players released statements on, Black Lives Matter and racism. That's unheard of in hockey, but there was an issue humanized. And it was a failure of the league and the PAH not having any education available to those players immediately after, when they'd be willing to listen, learn, and be educated on it. So we're relying on them. People who've been in this bubble their entire lives and don't even know half these issues exist to research and educate themselves. And then we want them to speak consistently on it. It's unrealistic. It's never going to happen unless we, unless the league, which is a corporate entity, so they need to know better, and the PA, which is a union and needs to know better, shift it and allow people in to make the shift. And the same with Hockey Canada, and same with every federation governing body across the country and across hockey culture, period.
Just as a sort of thought experiment in a way, you talked about humanizing the issue, like your athletes working with you had a face. Like, is there any sort of merit to the idea that if a male, like, pro hockey player in the NHL were to come out, it would just be shocked into change? Or is that just so unfair and so much pressure to put on that athlete?
Well, we saw a 13-year-old kid, or 16-year-old kid come out on the East Coast, Yannick Duplessis.
Yeah.
And got hounded with media attention. And traditional media, the majority of them got his story wrong. They didn't even dig at all. It was piss poor, lazy journalism. And, I'm very comfortable saying that, and I've told many of them this. So, and he's quit hockey.
Oh, well.
He doesn't even play anymore. And nobody even mentioned the fact that, he felt uncomfortable in the locker room with his coaches, the language and behaviors they used in U18 the year before, and how he went from being the top player in his age at 15 years old to, quitting at 17.
Yeah.
I think we'll run a player out of hockey. I don't think anyone's going to come out in the next, decades, personally. And I don't know if it'll change anything. I mean, we had Jason Collins and John Amici come out in basketball, and there's, Kevin Durant releasing, DM tirade that was so homophobic and misogynistic on a journal or a reporter, so I think it needs that humanizing aspect of like, this is what happens to people in this culture. Like, these are the stories of kids coming to me who are in the culture and cutting themselves daily and going from being elite players to barely writing their names on tests. And we need to rally for them because, if we don't, people will die, first and foremost, and two, people will quit the sport. And we see decreasing numbers annually in the men's side of hockey in Canada. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, there's misogyny, homophobia, racism, and different things that exist in the culture. And we're seeing the numbers go down. Like, why would you want to put your kid in that?
Mm-hmm. You bring up a point that we've discussed on our show in the past, and it really pertains to just hockey culture in general. I've sort of talked about how growing up, I've gone through what I would like to think is some form of an evolution, but, Don Cherry hockey was what I tuned into every Saturday night, right? Like, it was rock'em sock'em hockey. I got to hear everything that never needed to be told about chicken Swedes, which even like it hurts me to say something like that, but it was perfectly fine. It was okay. It's just the way Don Cherry, but the prototypical hockey coach spoke. And there was a change that took place, probably more on the business side as opposed to the human side, with his departure from Hockey Night in Canada. But it almost seemed to me to be more of a virtue signal. This is what we've done. Look at this is not tolerated. But at what point might we ever see that become a thing? Like you'd mentioned, it could take decades. I don't know if I could myself tolerate this for decades. And I'm not living, within that culture. I'm not, I am a straight white male. I can't even relate to some of the pressures and harassment that people see and face themselves. And yet I can't think I can tolerate. How does this change? And is it just education, humanizing issues, you said, or what more could be done, I guess?
I think, there's so many people, there's so many gatekeepers. I sat down, I got asked to sit on a board of directors for a provincial governing body in late 2019, early 2020. And I sat in an interview with somebody, I sat in a coffee shop with somebody who was conducting the interview for the governing body. And he is one of the heads of Minor Hockey Association and runs their diversity and inclusion. He's a straight white cis man, probably in his 60s, pretty high up at a major corporate, making really good money, so he's affluent. And with sitting down in the first 3 minutes, he told me that he is a white man in today's society as a minority. He went on to tell me that the Leafs won't win a cup because their best player is American and they have too many Swedes who are mentally soft. And then as we went on, he never asked me one question about me. And then at the end, he told me that my focus is too narrow-minded in terms of I guess my focus is LGBTQ plus. And I said, well, that's funny. Played professional hockey, ran 3 businesses in the game, coached 8+ teams annually. I have a degree in communications, and I'm certified in diversity and inclusion from Cornell. I said, I think I bring more to the table than just being gay. I said, and you have major issues in your sport, from your messaging to how people are treated to everything else. And I said, your numbers go down annually. And he said, yeah, that's why we're focused on Asians. There's a lot of them.
Wow.
This is January 2020.
Yeah.
I told the NHL about this because they had some ties to him, and they told me, oh, he's probably just testing you. I've been told that one of the major governing bodies monitors my Twitter. I know for a fact the NHL does. I tweet things, and then they email me and call me, and high up people, and I've been threatened by them. I think in terms of shifting it, we need players to speak up. Mm-hmm. We need to humanize it for players, and then we also need. I think at some point we have to go after their sponsors. We have to rally as community and say we don't tolerate this anymore. And then I think we also, I'm working on a not-for-profit right now for queer people and allies, LGBTQ plus people and allies in starting in hockey and then moving on into other sports. And one of the goals is to build community so that we are more of a united front in tackling some of this and getting people to feel good and not feel so marginalized and also alone in feeling that way. I think that's a big problem, is a lot of the times when people are marginalized, they feel like they're alone in it. Like I still have, I did an interview with Ron McLean in the summer, and I said randomly I still have trauma around hockey. And then a light bulb went off, and I said, like, I have years of therapy, and I went, oh my God, I still have trauma around hockey. Like, I didn't even recognize it. And every time it happens, or when I get, like, people don't know about the death threats I get from, where people DM me my address and tell me they're going to kill me, and the threats from different hockey leagues and everything else, I internalize all that. Mm-hmm. I hadn't been putting it out there because, I didn't think it would help other people. So, and here I am putting it out there. But the point of it is, I recognize that, wait, if I have like all these people around me and support networks and, thousands of followers and everything else, how about everyone else? Yeah. So why can't we build more community where people support one another and we have peer support and we have, for those who need it, potentially have funds for therapy and counseling and different things to help people feel good in this culture. And then from there, get everyone mobilized, get everyone out and joining hockey associations. So we actually, as the non-traditional hockey folks, have seats at the table, so that, that hockey association isn't, I know of hockey associations where coaches have said the most heinous things to children and they're still coaching. I could go on for, 4 podcast episodes of stories. Mm-hmm. But now if we have, some allies, some queer people, some people of color, some, different groups of women sitting on those boards, and women who haven't conformed and adhered to the, and all these people who haven't conformed and adhered to the hockey culture. If we're sitting there and we're saying, no, we don't tolerate that, and then we have a body behind it saying and amplifying it, saying this isn't acceptable. Yeah. Maybe then it'll force them, and then maybe then their sponsors will take it serious and say, hey, we don't want our names attached with that, And then maybe as a whole, instead of me screaming about the fact that, Chick-fil-A is a sponsor of over 10 teams in the NHL, and, they not only promote and support, but they fund conversion therapy. And then there's the Washington Capitals this past week saying, like, putting out a tweet saying we are allies and we support the LGBTQ plus community. And if they score 3 goals or more in the game, you get a free chicken sandwich at Chick-fil-A. You know what I mean? Like you can't have it both ways, but we need to have voices saying this is unacceptable. And it can't just be me shouting from rooftops and on Twitter, or individuals doing it with less of a platform for me. It has to be a collective. And I think that's where the shift will come. And that's when we'll get into doors and we'll humanize and we'll shift it and we'll break down barriers of conformity in the sport where people can be themselves and play, at all levels. And I think at that point we'll have, well-rounded people who are happy. We will have people who don't have to conform. We'll have people who can be themselves regardless of their sexuality. We'll have more people of color feel comfortable joining our sport, and we'll, develop human beings. The funniest thing to me has always been, you listen to parents say the reasons why they put their kids in hockey: work ethic, discipline, learning from a coach, working with teammates, and everything else, right? Teamwork and all that fun stuff. And those are all wonderful qualities. Well, why can't they learn about social issues and what's okay to say and what isn't okay to say, and how to engage with people of different ethnicities, different, religious backgrounds, different sexualities? Because when they get in the real world, and less than 1% of these kids are going to make $1 in the game, so they're going to be in the real world. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to know those things.
Yeah.
And we're creating generation after generation of people who don't.
Mentioning it, like, I have a soon-to-be 4-year-old adult here in my house. Yeah. We just got her involved in some soccer lessons. Soccer is my sport. That's what I grew up with, being in the tropical part of Canada. As my winter sport. Don't know how to skate, and yet I have a hockey podcast. But I would be happy if she actually learned about inclusivity as part of sport. Like, I truly would. Like, I want for her to be able to interact with people. I mean, at the end of the day, I want for her to be better than I was. Like, that's my goal. Mm-hmm. And I can't assume, but I can almost presume there's going to be a parent who has their child who would tell me, I don't want that because that's not what this is about. And to your point, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's going to remain a problem, because that's almost equating sport to be somehow different than life. It's like, well, you're not people when you're teammates. You're not people when you're in the workplace. So I'm just sort of sharing my thought here, but
I agree with you. And the funny thing is, a lot of the time is people have been, taught this, and they treat players like they're not human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at all levels, you know what I mean? And they're human. We're all human. Or they'll say, shut up and play hockey. Well, no, just because what that is either, some terms that are really good, or like white fragility. And Curtis Gabriel and I have been talking a lot, and I think there's straight fragility. And people become defensive in those situations because they don't want to feel uncomfortable or feel as if they've been doing something bad or wrong. Mm-hmm. Right? So they'd rather avoid altogether. And instead of having to take accountability for their actions. But you know what? We've all done bad things. We've all done shitty things. It doesn't make us bad human beings. It's how we grow from it that will decide who we are as human beings. So I think if we disarm people from thinking that way and make them feel as if, hey, it's okay, and you know what, shit's happened and that's life, but why don't we get better? Mm-hmm. Why don't we learn and grow? It's okay that, you maybe said the wrong thing before. That's life. We all have. But how are you going to learn and grow today? And really what that is that's, the same thing as not being a good skater or having a bad snapshot. And all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm not going to work on my snapshot. You're just going to stay comfortable in your zone and be a good skater who can stick handle and just pass. You know what I mean? No, you got to work on your snapshot. You got to work on the things that make you uncomfortable. And it's no different here. Yeah, you know these other characteristics because you've learned them, and you don't understand this, so you want to avoid it. But no, we got to learn about this. I didn't know about this. You know what I mean? I've learned and I've evolved and I've grown. So that's why I don't hold people like I'm not one of those people that want to, crucify anyone who gets things wrong, because we all do, and it's inevitable that we all will. But it's how you develop and grow. Like, I've had situations where, people have misconstrued different things or saw a tweet from someone else that I wasn't even tagged in, and all of a sudden I'm being attacked. And instead of de-escalating the situation, I'll get angry and, right back. And I'm like, wait, why am I engaging in this type of discourse and this type of banter? Instead, now it's like we had a situation where people were, misconstruing some things, and Curtis got into some tweets with some people and tagged me in them. And I just went, wait, stop. This isn't let's just go on a Zoom. And I went on a Zoom with some young queer people and had a 2.5-hour conversation and evolved it. And they understood a little more, and I understand where they're coming from, but I also understood where they were coming from because I deal with queer youth and younger queer people on a daily basis. But at the same time, there was learning in progress, and I try and learn about, things that don't apply to me, racism and misogyny and things like that, because, we have to continue to learn and grow. And that's okay that I'm going to get some things wrong.
Yeah.
We all will. We all will. I've seen it's, it's funny. I was talking to this mother the other day, and she has a trans child, and I'm not sure the identity, so I'll say they, them, just to be safe. But they get upset every time a relative misgenders them.
Yeah.
Which I understand, it's frustrating, but they have to, I believe, give people some room to grow and make mistakes, because the child misgenders their own friends at times.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like, you're doing it and you're not, you want a little bit of grace, but we have to, if people are doing things in good faith, we have to give them some room to grow. It's when they're doing it in bad faith. Like if you're on Canucks Twitter, that's where you can't give them room to grow.
I mean, yeah, I think a good recent example would be Braden Holtby and his mask. He wanted to do a good thing and represent Indigenous local culture. He went about it the wrong way, and he took it as an educational opportunity. Of course, some people overreacted because that's Canucks Twitter.
On both sides.
On both sides. Completely. Completely valid point there.
Yeah, if we just, it would have been easy to say this isn't okay. This isn't how, if you're appropriating culture by doing this. And instead, a lot of people lashed out at, one of the humanitarians in the NHL, one of the only people who's outspoken on social injustices. And then the other side lashed out on the side that lashed out. And you know what I mean? And I understand why the first side's lashing out. They've been oppressed. Yeah. Oppressed people are, it's a fight for their lives a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. But when the side that isn't oppressed lashes at them, it's not helping the situation. If you stopped oppressing, people wouldn't feel the need to, come so hot all the time with things. So if we just, it's like on Canucks Twitter, a lot of the time I step in when I see there's a ton of misogyny.
Yes.
Oh gosh, yes.
I see, whether it's Sam or Nikki or other people take so much. And anytime I see anything on my timeline, whether it's them or others, even whether it's Canucks Twitter or elsewhere, I'm like, hey, first of all, get off your burner and message from your main, coward. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to be that person, and secondly, who are you to speak to anyone like this, let alone a woman like this? You're a tough guy.
Yeah.
And yet if somebody else made a comment they didn't realize was, it was taken out of context or what they didn't realize was misogynistic, you'd have more understanding and the ability to, grow with them and educate them and celebrate them when they get it right.
Yeah.
But there's too many people doing things that are oppressive that lead a whole beat to get attacked.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think kind of what you've said overall about this culture of silence on, not speaking up when you're in positions of power or, in general, why it gets propagated. But I think just talking about it and using a platform like you have is just like such an important step to breaking up that culture. But yeah, I guess it's keep going, and you need more allies in that fight, and particularly those with money and power to join you.
Yeah, thanks. It's it's a grind. And I think about leaving it every day. I think about it and go, really? Like, I'm spending hours on social media or having on calls with leagues and having people harass me or threaten me or different things. And I'm like, I can be like hanging out with my partner and my dog, or I could be making money right now. It's like unpaid labor, right? And it's, it becomes a lot. But then I also look at, I'm sitting there Friday night and I have a kid who grew up in hockey culture and all of his friends are in hockey culture. And he's talking about, wanting to die. And I'm texting with this person who's now an adult, but when I first met him, he was a kid, and I worked with him and his family and got him support in the cities and tried to help him a great deal. And but there's thousands of those that keep me here, because it's like, if I don't, who's helping them and what's happening to them? And I don't want anyone to feel the way I felt. And if everyone just realized that, like you're not bad, but like you're doing something that's hurting people, like genuinely hurting people, and you can call them soft or weak or whatever you want, but it's not, because you know what? If somebody called me a racial slur, I'd be like, okay.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it doesn't pertain to me.
Mm-hmm.
But when somebody's struggling with something like their sexuality and you're hitting them with, homophobic or transphobic or anything comments, that's hurting them deep. If you're, using racial slurs at somebody who is, not white, that's hurting them deep, because there's their own trauma, their own judgment, their own shit that they're dealing with and have dealt with their entire lives, plus things that people who came before them dealt with.
Yeah.
Same with women, you know what I mean? And if we just recognize that and just stop, just stop. That's the first step. Just stop using that type of language. Shift your language is the easiest thing you can do to start making a shift in society. And it shouldn't be that hard. Like, if you need to Google a word, like we all have phones and laptops and different things. You don't even need a thesaurus today, like
it's a lesson. I mean, words are a lesson that I find people don't recognize as being as powerful as they are. Things are said so off the cuff, and I'm not trying to discount. There are those that do it with intent, but even something off the cuff, in my mind, it propagates the issue, because what you said may not have you may not have desired the impact, but it landed, as you said, deep, hard, and it just normalizes it for someone else who might take it the step further.
100%. Like, I look at being in the locker room my entire life, and I wasn't, I was the hockey player growing up. I had tons of friends. I, was a good hockey player, had on the surface, had a pretty great life. And those words just being thrown around, whether it's either teasing one another or jabs or anything else, and there's no malicious intent, or just hearing people say, like, when they're disappointed, like that one kid doing it, the extra sprints, like, this is so gay. that negative connotation with being me every single day beat into me over and over and over and over and over, made me think I was bad and wrong, made me think I was a freak, made me think there was something wrong with me to the point that I'd rather not be alive than be this. And nobody was saying they're bullying me and harassing me daily. And then a point you made earlier, Chris, about being silent is, when that stuff happens and everyone else laughs or doesn't say anything to prevent it, that amplifies it. And I think we have this idea in society today that, or people do, that they're good people because they don't say bad things, but everyone around them does, and they don't stop it. When I go into schools or locker rooms or even corporates and I talk about language, I break down 5 different types. Direct, which would be like the bullying; the indirect, those off the cuff remarks; laughter, when people use the comments and everyone else laughs. That's the same thing as saying it. Mm-hmm. Like I say it's like, being an accomplice to a crime. It's, you're still charged, like you're still guilty. Body language that people don't take into account. If you see a gay person or a trans person or somebody else and you kind of have like shrug your shoulders or kind of turn your body, or you hear about something that's, homosexual and people go, oh, like they make a face, like, that you might as well call me a fag. Like you might as well just flat out say it because that's what you're doing. And silence is deafening. In today's society, I think, we're learning, and we learned through the summer with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything, and the anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism and what we learned and had to sit and watch and hear, and that we can't be silent. It's not okay anymore. And I also think there's different ways to approach it. I think a lot of the times people scream and out of anger and frustration and attack the person making comments, and I don't think that necessarily accomplishes anything either at times, because it creates barriers of communication. Where I think if we engage and educate people, we will have much more success in not pushing people further away from issues. And I think that's critical, especially if we know people, we have the ability to sit them down and have conversations and humanize an issue. Like I look at LGBTQ+, there hasn't been a place I haven't spoke that when I say, who here knows somebody who identifies as part of the LGBTQ+ community, 90% of the hands go up. Every single time without a doubt. And it's in there like, okay, you all know people. And then my next question is, who here has used homophobic language? All the hands go up. Mm-hmm. But, we can humanize in our own lives and go, hey, isn't your aunt a lesbian, or isn't your niece or nephew LGBTQ+? Like, aren't, and then get them thinking and the impact that would have on them if they heard that. And once we humanize that issue and bring it back to somebody in their life, or the impact of, like in hockey, like saying like, hey, here's my impact. Here's how it impacted me in the culture. Here's how it's impacting the kids that are coming to me. Then I think we have the basis of starting to create shifts. Like I know at least 20 players in the league right now who have queer siblings. Not one of them has spoken up on this issue. Mm-hmm. And I get it. It's a code of silence and it's a culture of silence. But silence is deafening. And we need to recruit them and engage them to start using their voice.
Definitely.
And we've been taking up a lot of your time, so thank you, so much about it.
Of course, happy to.
Like this is great value, and it's already got me thinking of, we're gonna have to get you back on our show, because there's more questions I want to sort of ask you and talk to you about, not only from your experience, but just like we scratch the surface about hockey culture. Yeah. And there is so much there that can be peeled back. But I didn't, want to leave the show without asking some, lighthearted questions. I pitched this idea that we don't take ourselves too seriously. When will the Vancouver Canucks win a Stanley Cup?
I almost spit my drink out of my mouth. I think there's a better chance of a player coming out of the closet than the Canucks winning the Cup.
Wow. I I mean, obviously, hoping for both here, but yeah.
I'm gonna tweet that tonight. That's one of the funniest things I've said in a while. I've taken it easy on Vancouver hockey lately because I feel bad for them. I don't know when's Jim's contract over.
Yeah, that's hopefully soon.
2 more years, apparently.
When are you going to stop signing fourth line hockey players who are good people to 4-year contracts with no movement clauses and $3+ million a year? I mean, when over a quarter of your cap is made up of money that I don't want to call it useless money, but I mean money that could be that league minimum guys could be doing the job for the same money. Plus the players that are not even with the team anymore, like Birchie and Roberto Luongo.
Yeah.
That was the funniest when I saw he's still getting paid for a couple more years. That one made me laugh. Yeah, I don't know. I think you run the risk of some of your core is getting too old. By the time they're ready, like I think JT Miller will be past his prime and everything else when you actually have the bad contracts gone. So giving up a first for him, while he's a really good hockey player and he's worth the value of a first, by the time you have sufficient money to spend, they're going to be gone or old. So, I mean, you have Pedersen, you have Hughes, and I like the kid in that. So you have some building blocks. And he hasn't done a bad draft. Hoglander looks good. You have that other kid over in Europe that's supposed to be pretty strong, right?
Podkolzin.
Yeah. It's how do you supplement the core, right? And currently they gave players that really should be 1 year minimum players, multi-year deals at expensive dollars, and I don't know, like you got to get past that money. I think that's going to be it, and you got to draft well and keep your picks and stop getting in the way, and really you should have tried to trade some players and recoup more picks. And
see, that's smart hockey management.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is when Jim's gone, because none of those things sound like Jim Benning moves.
Well, I don't understand how you can go it's a day-to-day thing middle of the season. On the other side, though, I don't understand how Ken Holland can say today that some years you don't go for it when you have the two top scorers in the NHL and a 40-year-old goalie. So I'm very confused with hockey people, and I remain confused. I mean, let's not even get into Buffalo. It could be worse. You could be Buffalo. You're Buffalo of Canada.
Yeah. Well, we have Buffalo, but at least like with positive temperatures in the positives and blossoms. You
have beautiful parks, and you can go outside, and it's lovely, and you see whales and different things. So that's cool. But your hockey team, I don't know if there's a worse core moving forward that I don't know if there's a team based off draft picks, prospects, and current cap issues that I think is worse off in Canada. I really mean that, and I don't mean that in a harsh way, and I know we're going to be lighthearted here, but I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, maybe Calgary. But I think they can move some players out pretty quick and start a retool. Like, I'd rather be Ottawa.
Well, Ottawa, that's the thing. Ottawa, people would reference Ottawa.
Because Ottawa
they're in a good spot.
Worse than the Canucks, but they're getting better.
A Eugene Melnyk team.
Yeah.
Oh, poor Vancouver. I mean, it's what you get for having such a beautiful city.
Apparently.
You can't have everything.
A few members in our community have already started to look at what the cost would be to get a couple bulletin boards purchased to possibly throw a message seen as it. Well, I was going to say it didn't work in Ottawa, but it sure got attention. Would be kind of
Well,
interesting to see if that
if
happened.
you all
up
just
this way.
become Kraken fans, like it's down the road.
Oh,
We'll
that's
get our
starting to
guys.
happen.
We can go back across the border. It's a nice drive. You know, they seem like a pretty cool organization, very inclusive and mindful of social injustices. So, you know, it might be an option.
I think, honestly, that Jeff Bezos arena is probably the only thing that's keeping me from being a Kraken fan. I'm like this close.
Well, I mean, there's net positives, though. Like,
oh, for sure.
And there's probably currently less mediocre Kraken podcasts.
They're actually okay. We actually have friends down south that put in a good product. They, in fact, one of their hosts, John, was actually involved, with the groundbreaking for the rink. I mean, they're a great podcast.
Well, fuck. So their podcasts aren't even mediocre.
Yeah.
Nope.
Sound of Hockey, great friends of the show.
Yeah.
They have us beat
y'all are
everywhere.
screwed on the West Coast. You got to deal with that. Oh my god! At least you're not Alberta. I mean, that's the only.
Yeah.
It could be worse. It could be Alberta.
Man, you're going to hear from our Albertan listeners. We do have a few Canucks fans in Alberta who.
That's fine. I'm used to. My favorite thing in the world midway through the season this year was just start to troll every Canadian fan base.
So easy.
I was just like, you know what? I talk about so much serious shit all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, it's not fun for me.
Yeah.
I don't even like watching. Like, I had the Blue Jay game on in the background right now, not a hockey game, because it's not even fun. It's not an enjoyable experience knowing that I got to deal with all this crap all the time. So what I started to do to have fun again was just troll every fan base. And Vancouver, because I've been on a lot of the podcasts, like out of the 10,000 of them, I've been on about 2,000 of them. So they got it, which was surprising because I saw the in-hate and I thought they would come for me the hardest. But they understood it the most and had fun with it. We had a blast. Like, I love trolling Vancouver fans more than anyone.
Well, I enjoy your trolling, honestly, because completely fair.
Yeah, if you ever need to lash out a Canucks podcast, I mean, we're good. Send it our way.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
And Anna's probably said worse about us, and yeah, it could be trying to set the bar. Well, again, thanks for joining us. But for our listeners, if they're looking to find out more about the initiatives you're supporting, but also yourself, where can they go to learn more?
Yeah, either my website, brockmcgillis.com, my Twitter is brock_McGillis, and my Instagram is brockmcgillis33, between those three spaces. And even if there's anyone that's struggling with anything and needs somebody to talk to, feel free to reach out. I'm, always available. Sometimes it takes a few days to get back, but I promise I will.
Cool. Awesome.
Well,
thank you. Thanks again for joining us. This now means you're a friend of the show, which is like exclusive, Vancouver honor. I'm sure there's no other podcast that has friends of the show like we do.
I don't want to be a friend of the broadcast, so that's good.
Wow.
Man, you might be starting a new Vancouver Canucks podcast war. We just got through the last one. And now,
who's the last one with?
Well, I mean, when isn't there actually one going on? It's Vancouver Canucks Twitter is encapsulated with the Vancouver Canucks podcast sphere.
Let's just say
goodness.
We'll start one with trust the process. Like, sure.
Do we still consider Area 51 a podcast? Does anyone listen to that anymore?
They're point shot, aren't they now?
Yeah, but the Area 51's like the network with they've got hockey and Seahawks and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So does anyone view other than Sean and his maybe, I don't know, parents and cousins?
I would be happy if my parents and cousins listen to this show. I know Anna's mom does.
My mom, who does not know anything about hockey, listens every single week.
Awesome. Hi, Anna's mom. Is she in Vancouver?
No, back in London.
Okay. I love London. That's my favorite city in the world.
Yeah, mine too.
Well,
I really think so. Like, in the future, I'll end up living there.
Yeah, I miss it. I mean, the pubs are open today, so they're like very excited.
My last major trip pre-COVID was I did DragCon UK. I did an event at DragCon UK, and it was such a blast. Like, the gay bars in London are so fun.
Yeah.
Heaven's a blast.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had some fun times in heaven, for sure.
Well, they had us up in, I was in the owner's kind of room, and then in his like box with the drag queens and stuff, and it was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, we have to go back.
Yeah, me too.
I'm unfortunately sad to say the only bar I've been to in London is it Canada House, Anna? Is that
the Maple Leaf?
The Maple Leaf, yeah,
wait,
right.
You went to London and you went to the like stereotypical Canadian place?
So there's some backstory here. There was myself, my best friend and his wife were there. My sister happened to, we all just happened to be in the UK at the same time. And me not knowing anywhere to sort of meet up that was central, like I was suggesting like big landmarks. And my sister's like, oh, we'll go to the Canadian bar. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I made the mistake.
Yeah,
many mistakes.
It's actually opposite one of the best bars in London. Porterhouse is a really fun bar. Go to Porterhouse next time.
Yeah,
there's a lot of very fun bars. I went to see a show in the West End because somebody I know was in a play, and that was really cool. The theaters there are incredible. They're like from the 1800s still. It's wild. Like, I don't know. It's such a cool city.
Yeah.
Except for the rain. The rain sucks. But nobody cares.
I'm used to that.
Nobody cares. Everyone's outside in the rain. I'm like, get me an Uber now.
Jeez, now I'm thinking we need to get you onto an episode of our Off the Rails podcast too. There's all sorts of good stuff coming from this.
What's that about?
Everything. Well, it's our patron only show, but it's where Anna and I talk about anything not hockey related.
Oh my god, can we do a full episode on London, UK, and like drunken party nights?
Well,
definitely. Okay,
this is it. It's going to happen.
Okay, let me know when. I'm there.
Awesome.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thanks again, Brock. We're going to take ourselves a short break. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com and the Full Press Coverage Network.
He liked to say the F word.
Oh, then get the here then. Okay, see ya.
Is going to have the F word on it.
I wish I could give you an explanation about it. I can't. You, out of here.
You said the F word, Dad.
You called me the F word.
Oh my goodness, Brock was awesome. Like it's this position where we're kicking off the F word, which it was effing awesome, the conversation.
It really was. Yeah, I thought we really got into depth and kind of went on a journey there of got quite negative, and then Brock was able to bring it back and talk about his hopes for the future. So
yeah,
probably I think quite positive in the end.
Yeah, and ultimately the conversation I feel is an important one that we all need to have. I mean, it's the only way that hockey, but sport, and just us as culture move forward is by remembering the human element and acknowledging that our lens may be doing us a disservice, and that we need to understand how we ourselves can make a positive contribution and a positive impact. So I hope if we think about you as our listeners, that at least one, hopefully more of you hear that and are like, no, you know what? I need to reconsider the words I use, the actions that I take, or the inaction or the silence, and how I can be an instrument of change, because that's how we evolve to be more inclusive just as a society.
Definitely. And, people make mistakes. Brock himself, who's, this LGBT LGBTQ plus advocate. He's highly qualified in the area, and he says, he makes mistakes, and people do, but you've just got to learn from them and be honest and keep talking.
Yeah. So, what is there to get all effed up about in the NHL? Well, really, it's what we talked about earlier. It's the COVID scheduling, but ultimately the pandemic and its impact on the business side. I mean, just thinking back to the conversation we had with Tom, the business side of the operation speaks loudly. I mean, let's be real. There's some big money involved here. And as a business, you need to ensure that you honor your agreements and ultimately look to grow that investment, not only for you, but your partners. And when I think about how the NHL is approaching this, they've almost put themselves in this position to potentially, create the problem that they're living in today. Like, we think about it. They played an aggressive schedule with a hard stop of Summer Olympics that may or may not happen. I mean, it looks like it will, but it's just unfortunate that then you have a team like the Vancouver Canucks who are having to go straight in from recovering. And it's not like other teams that have had games postponed. I mean, maybe Dallas Stars at the start of the season, but the Vancouver Canucks are coming in to a situation that they themselves may not be healthy, and yet they're being forced to play.
Yeah, I mean, even before the stoppage, Canucks schedule was insane. Trying to get a 56-game season into this small amount of time, with travel across a whole country, because the North Division is a whole country. So it was crazy. And let's not forget that we might criticize the Canucks for holding their morning skate, for example, for not pulling all the players off the ice when more than one tested positive, but they were operating under NHL protocols.
Well, and that's the thing that I think people lose sight of, is that the protocol that was in place allowed for that to happen. Now, it's a double-edged sword, because then people will say, well, wait a minute, the patients or Adam wasn't following protocol. Well, we don't know that. And from what I understand, even if, let's say, the NHL were to say, hey, because Michaela had sort of shared this on social, where the NHL had said, avoid going to, public spaces, shopping, things of that sort. I completely understand why the NHL or even the team would suggest that, but that's still within reason. Like, you or I could do that. So why would it be any different for an NHL player? I mean, just no different than us bringing it back to the workplace. It's just that what the NHL continued to allow.
Yeah, I think it's quite dangerous to start speculating where it originated, because, I mean, Jake Vatanen was added to the NHL protocol list, and he was never at practice with Adam Gaudette. He missed that day.
Yeah, well, and that's I mean, what did we know? Jake Virtanen was sick. Like, for a team that is not upfront about injuries and illnesses generally, we knew that Adam Gaudette was being put into protocol and got pulled. We knew that Jake Virtanen missed a practice because he was sick. And so people were then thinking, oh, was it Jake? Because he was sick, right? What does sick mean? But then he wasn't, and many other players were. And then eventually Jake found his way on to protocol. And to your point, he wasn't at practice. So we truly don't know everything that's going on. There is a much bigger picture at play, but comes down to the fact that the Vancouver Canucks were following the rules. And despite that, COVID-19 found a way to still make an impact. And I think you think about the bigger picture here. Following the rules can only help you so much.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but like, hockey as a sport, it's just almost like the best conditions for COVID spread. And then obviously there's the extra factor of this P1 variant that's very quickly contagious.
Yeah. But again, we're not epidemiologists. We do not have a medical background. We might have stayed in a Holiday Inn at once, but even then, that doesn't qualify us. It's just an opinion, and we're sharing about, how the NHL has dealt with it. And hopefully, fingers crossed, it's not going to be an issue moving forward as they get into the postseason. But as we look to wrap up the show, again, what a phenomenal episode it's been, another long one, but a great conversation with Brock McGillis. Please give him a follow. Let us know your thoughts. We're going to have Brock back. I think we have to. I mean, there's so much more we can talk to him about. So, we'll look to line that up. But he's just such a well-spoken guy, really easygoing. And as you probably noticed, required me to throw the explicit flag onto this episode. But again, have no issue with that. No. I noted the times the first few shits dropped, but then I just gave, I no longer gave a shit. And I can say that because this is an explicit episode.
No. But yes, super important message. So definitely worth an
If you are, wanting to get in on the conversation though about this show, you want to join Discord. C4 Discord is the greatest place in the world. It's discord.io/C4 podcast. Join in the conversation in Gate 16 or non. We've had some pretty decent food conversations as of late. And the way the Canucks are potentially headed, we might be talking about food sooner than later, more than that. But if you're looking for myself and Anna's A4Seth03 on Twitter. I'm Chris at Lightforce. Obviously, give us both a follow. And if you haven't done so already, follow us. And again, what final words of wisdom do you have for all of our listeners there, Anna?
Well, I think once again, our wisdom has been copped by our very intelligent guests. But important conversation to have. Thanks everyone for sticking with another long episode. And yeah, as Brooke says, keep talking, keep challenging and yourself and others. And yeah, hopefully we can start to dismantle this destructive hockey culture.
Agreed. And as you said, I don't think we could say it any better than that. So on behalf of Anna, myself, Chris, and CanucksHockeyBlog.com, as well as the Full Press Coverage Network, this episode of C4 is done. We out.